with regard to this topic, a men's rights movement is unnecessary. To this, I would basically say that there's two things to look at. There's the inherency and there's the significance. The inherency would be the question of what issues are currently being addressed and what's the best way to address them. And I would suggest that any issues facing men are best addressed by using feminism, because feminism is defined as the belief that the two genders are equal. So feminists already do and will continue to fight for issues primarily for women because women face, but also to fight for issues that men face because that is fighting for equality of the two genders. That's the best way to do it. There's no reason to have a second movement when you already have a movement that focuses on it. And the second issue is significance. The issue here is simply the fact that the issues that men face are significantly less severe than the issues that women face. For instance, if you look at crime, the overwhelming majority of crimes are committed by males, not females. And when it comes down to how many crimes are committed against men by women, it is significantly less than the amount of crimes committed against women by men. There's significantly more danger to being female than to being male. But this is also shown in the way society looks. For instance, the fact that government is overwhelmingly dominated by men. There are only 3 Congresses in the entire world that have more females than males. And usually that's not just like 51-49, it's 70-30 or 60-40, 80-20. There's an overwhelming amount of power that men have that women do not have. You also see this with regards to entertainment. Even in the United States, which likes to consider itself egalitarian, the overwhelming majority of entertainment is focused towards males, starring males, and is even when they have female characters, the characters are side characters. They fit into tropes, which is why many women have started saying, we want to see strong female characters. We want to see people who we can aspire to be like. You also see this with regards to economics. The overwhelming majority of money is controlled by males. So when we look at the questions of, do we need a men's rights movement? I'm sure there can be issues that are faced by men. There are issues that are faced by men. But the best way to address these issues is by focusing on egalitarianism, which means feminism. And the second issue that we have here is that of the significance. When you compare the two sides, it is clear that the issues that are faced by men cannot outweigh those faced by women.
Okay, so you're saying they have power. What is that? Like Nintendo power, or like do they have like? Is that like the power of Grayskull? What does that mean that men have power?
Well, for one thing, they control policy. For another thing, they control the majority of society, and they control the majority of the money.
Okay, I don't know how they control society. How do they control society?
That also ties into policy. Policy is controlled by the males, but also entertainment is controlled by males, as is economics. Those 3 things tie together, so culture winds up favoring males over females.
Okay, obviously you've never seen daytime TV, but 53% of voters are women. Okay, 53% of voters are women. Okay. The top 1% includes about 236,000 Americans. That's not that many men are in the top 1%. Not many of anyone is in the top 1%. You're talking about a very small percentage of the country. The only man in America who is actually more powerful than any woman is Donald Trump. The most powerful woman would be the Speaker of the House, and he's the president. So he's more powerful than any woman. He's probably the only person. But most voters are women. When people vote for candidates, they're not any more likely to vote for a man than a woman. When a man runs against a woman, they're just as likely. But your whole premise there about power presumes that men are a group, as though men have a unified agenda, that they're somehow trying to control the country somehow, to make it hard on women or something like that. I don't know where you're getting that from. That's basically patriarchy theory. The notion that women are more disadvantaged than men is ridiculous. The only things I ever hear about from feminists are, number one, I hear about the pay gap, which is statistical propaganda. I hear about rape statistics, which are a valid concern, but rape's against the law, and we're more concerned about that crime than any other crime, it seems that we ever talk about. Other than that, I hear about abortion. Abortion's legal right now, and it has nothing to do with gender. As far as men issues, they're pretty astounding, the things that men are dealing with in our society. But go back to your central point, feminism can't address issues of this because feminism is an ideology. Feminism doesn't just mean, well, there's a technical definition. You know, dictionaries don't really describe what words mean. They just kind of just tell us what people usually mean when they use words. If you ask a feminist why they don't use the word egalitarianism, what they will usually tell you is that they don't believe it should be egalitarianism because women are the sole subjects of gender inequality, the sole victims, and this is caused by a patriarchy. So basically, no person would call themselves a feminist if they didn't believe in patriarchy. So to say that that feminism can solve these things is kind of like saying, well, why don't we just all, if we're all against gun violence, why don't we all join the NRA because the NRA is against gun violence? Feminism is an ideology that has certain ideas and certain solutions that are erroneous. This is why feminism can't solve the problem, because it's based on erroneous ideas and it has erroneous solutions to the problems. Being against gender inequality does not describe a position. It doesn't describe an ideology. That's not all it is.
You said a couple things there. The first thing you said was that only the president is more powerful, that 53% of voters are female. Well, this is the 53% of voters being female is correct. However, there are a couple things to say that. First, that's relatively new. It hasn't been that way for as long. It's been more recent over time, since women only within the last 150 years managed to get the authority to vote in the first place. And along that same lines, the second answer here is that there aren't as many female candidates because, as with anything, things change slowly over time. When the African Americans the slavery was finally abolished, you still didn't see a significant amount of African Americans in politics because it takes a while to change once you have the power in that sort of sense.
Everything you're saying is based on the false premise that gender issues are similar to racism in that they are caused by a power elite trying to subjugate a weaker group. That is called conflict theory. It does not hold true for gender. Men are not a group. They're not identified as a group with equal goals and equal ideals as far as trying to gain. Sexism, as far as the stuff men issue, is due to gynocentrism, which is both genders are gynocentric. So the fact that men are in power, or that there are congressmen in power, which are there are 5,581 men that hold a state or federal congressional position. That's not very, and there are 159.4 million men in America. So those 5,000 men are not really indicative of men in this country. But regardless, what causes problems for men is not women or women having power. It's caused by gynocentrism. We have an inborn tendency to favor women and to think that men don't have much value because they can fend for themselves, etc.
Okay, so first, to quickly answer the thing about power. So I'm not suggesting that men are intentionally demeaning women. I'm not saying that there is this like conspiracy among males, that there is this group identity of males. However, that did used to exist. For the majority of recorded history, men did do that to women. Women were expected to be in a certain role. They were expected to cook, clean, and make babies. It is only more recently that we have moved past that. but we still haven't solved all of the issues because many of the mindsets of that way of thinking are still left over. For instance, you look at women are the ones who wind up taking on the man's name. That is a carryover from the way that it used to be when the man was the important one and the lineage ran through him. Men still have the majority of economic positions because that is the way it used to be. And we've kind of, even though women have the ability to have high economic positions, there's still a line of thinking that the way this job is done is this. Here are the job expectations. So women get excluded from that. And it takes a while for that cultural expectation to start to change. And it is changing. We are bringing more women in, but that's the point of feminism. And this is where we come into your point about egalitarianism. Why don't feminists use egalitarianism? Well, and you answer this by saying that women are the sole, feminists will say they are the sole subjects of gender inequality. I don't think that's correct because I've seen hundreds of articles from feminist organizations talking about issues that men face.
Okay, they can believe that women are not the sole subjects of gender inequality. But yeah, regardless, they think that the inequality even that men face is due to the patriarchy. So regardless of what you're saying, feminism is the belief in patriarchy theory. It is not merely the belief in equality.
Well, no, that's not actually true. Most feminists would believe in a patriarchy theory, but that isn't necessarily the case.
That is necessarily the case because nobody would call themselves a feminist if they didn't believe that.
You would call yourself a feminist if you believe that the issues faced by one gender are higher than the issues faced by the other gender. That's the reason that I would call myself a feminist, because it is clear to me that women face significantly more difficulty than men do.
I don't.
And I do agree that
maybe internationally, not here.
No, absolutely here.
Okay.
I mean, if you look at,
let me give you an example that just analyzes the concept that men are a power elite and they're subjugating women. Okay, so we've done this experiment many times. We've done this social experiment. Let's say that there's person A and person B, and they're walking down a public street. They're in a public square, or they're in a public park. And person B starts assaulting person A. We've done this social experiment many times. It always gets the same result. People watching person A assault person B, they start giggling. What did person A do wrong? And they're giggling about it. And then a person A decides to start defending his or herself, people will actually help person B attack person A. Now, is there any situation other than maybe the Deep South where you would think that the person B is the subjugated person and person A is the power elite? It makes no freaking sense.
Well, you know the reason why people would not believe that the male is in danger? Because statistically, it is overwhelmingly more likely that males will be the ones who commit violence.
That is nonsense. That is nonsense. It is not true.
Let's look at the numbers. A study by the CDC finds that nearly 1 in 5 women have been raped, but for men, the number is about 1 in 71. Women are also significantly more likely to be stalked, with 15.2% of women recording being stalked, where only 5.2% of men have experienced that. Violence worldwide, 91.9% of women who were physically assaulted were assaulted by a male, not by a female.
Boy, that's a lot of cherry picking. So you go to rape. So you go to rape here. Just one segment of a violence is rape, and then you go internationally to start talking about women being attacked more than men. Men are 3 times more likely in America to be murdered than women.
By men.
Who cares if it's by men? Who cares? What's the difference?
Well, what matters is the fact that who is committing the violence.
Who gives a crap who's committing the violence?
The statistics. You should
we
care about
underfund. Look, this is the issue here. We're talking about a men's movement, not a women's movement here. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a women's movement.
The underlying concepts. We're talking about the underlying concepts. You said that there is a problem because when people see men being attacked, they don't think it's as big of a deal.
Because people don't value their lives.
The reason why people think this is because men are significantly more likely to commit violence, and men are significantly more dangerous when they do commit the violence.
They're looking, okay, that's sexist. And first, the second statement you said was sexist. It's not true. Actually, men are more likely to report. In survey data, the amount of people that report being domestically assaulted is equal. but men are arrested 75% of the time. And you're talking about it, and we're talking about a situation where people are viewing the violence. They're actually watching the violence and they're giggling about it. And what kind of power elite arrests themselves 90% of the time more than the subjugating group?
I never said that. I never said that men are in this sort of like conspiracy to put themselves in power against women. That used to exist, as I have said.
No, it never existed. Well, let me explain to you what actually happened. Well,
that has always existed.
No, it's not.
Majority of history. But that's a side point anyway. But you said that the numbers of battered men is equal to the amount of battered women. Dr. Richard Gels has estimated that there are about 100,000 battered men in the United States, which he says is too high, but that there are 2 million to 4 million battered women.
I don't know who you're talking about. The statistics I'm getting is from the CDC. The survey data that I'm talking about is a very large study.
What was the question they were being asked?
I don't know. I didn't ask a question. You were making a false statement that domestic violence is equal. But the issue isn't that. Okay, the issue isn't that men are being violated. Who is being violated more? The issue is that publicly we don't care that men are being attacked.
In the survey that you referenced, what was the question that people were being asked?
I don't have it in front of me, but more often than not, men respond that they've been assaulted at home by a significant other.
It makes perfect sense that the numbers would say that men have been hit by a partner, a domestic partner, at the same rate that a woman has been hit by a partner. But like I was saying, what matters is the amount of people who are hit or hurt to the point of danger.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying good that women hit men, and it's not good that men hit women.
And men are far more likely to report to the police that they were assaulted only if they have severe physical trauma, and that's part of the study also. Which is also
the case with women. They don't report unless they have a significant amount of trauma, but women are more likely to experience that level of trauma.
They're more likely to report. They're more likely to report even if they aren't experiencing physical trauma. But it's irrelevant anyway.
To report it, yes.
It's irrelevant whether men are hitting other men or not. As far as the three.
It's not irrelevant.
No, it's not relevant because the issue is that the issue is that we don't give a crap. We have men being murdered 3 times more likely than women, but all of our funding and all of our outreach is for helping women.
Okay, so I mentioned that feminism has tried to assist men in a lot of different ways. And you answered that by saying, well, when they do that, it's because they're trying to root out patriarchy. Well, it's not just trying to root out patriarchy. It's trying to rule out the concept that there are specific expectations for men that they have to fit into. This is why you hear about toxic masculinity and why feminism will criticize toxic masculinity. For instance, the idea that men cannot cry, which is incredibly dangerous and often leads to them lashing out with violence. That's one of the things that feminists try and fight against. Or the idea that, oh, you have to be super strong, you have to have big muscles, you have to do all of these different things, you have to fit into this category. That's one of the things that feminism tries to fight against. Another thing that feminism tries to fight against is rape, which is an issue that affects both men and women, particularly if you look at prisons. In fact, it was feminists who were able to change the FBI's definition of rape, which used to be the carnal penetration of a woman against her will. That was the actual FBI definition, but it was feminists who got that changed to say that it is penetration of another human being without their consent. It's feminists who are fighting for issues that men face as well.
But they're doing it based on patriarchy theory, which is an erroneous concept. So the solution, their solution in every case is you disempower the power elite, and that's how you fix the problem.
Well, but that's some feminism.
Feminism does not, as a concept, allow for the idea that men need rights, because that would be contrary to patriarchy theory.
Sure, it does.
Some allow for some are moderates, but feminism as a concept does not allow for it.
Feminism as a concept is the idea that both men and women are equal.
Men are 10 times more likely than women be killed at work. Women are now comprising 70% of women. College enrollment is 71% for females, but it's unchanged for men in recent years at 61%. Boys score 2 points. Boys have IQ points 2 points higher than women, but women are graduating high school at a much higher rate. They're doing much better in school. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have pathologized malehood, boyhood. We have changed education so that boys aren't learning very much because we've taken all the competition out of school. There's a lot of studies that show that boys do really well with competitive activities that help them learn. That's all been taken out. So there's a lot of, we have, of course, the custody issues. And we have, of course, the fact that everything's underfunded for men as far as their, well, I'll give you explain to me in patriarchy theory how men are given 63% longer prison sentences for women. How does that explain in patriarchy theory?
Because it is not expected that a woman will commit as much crime because women don't commit as much crime.
But she's been arrested and convicted. So
yeah, but there is a natural bias towards the side that commits more crime, which is overwhelmingly male. Now, I agree with you that as culture changes, I would love to see that 50% of crime is committed by each side. And if that was the case, I think
we're not talking about them committing the same. We're talking about the sentences.
Don't be Michael Vineyard right now, man. I'm answering you. If we had 50% of crime being committed by each side, then you would likely see 50% equivalency with regards to prison sentences. But there is a natural human bias towards, for instance, if you see a girl who has committed a crime, you see a 14-year-old girl who committed a crime, you see a 14-year-old black boy with dreads, there is a instantaneous belief that the 14-year-old black boy is more dangerous. And while it would be nice that we can eventually change that, that's what currently exists in society.
Right, which is why we have a civil rights movement trying to help black people overcome those things. But you're saying we don't need a men's rights movement, even though it's happening to men actually more than it is happening to black people. Women are twice as likely to avoid incarceration if they're committed a crime. For the same felony, men being male increases the chances of incarceration by 165%. Obviously, we need a men's movement. A drunk driver will receive an average of a 3-year higher sentence for killing a female than for killing a male. Murdering a female instead of a male increases sentences by 40.6%. Compared to 26.8% for killing a white person instead of a black person. But we don't need a men's movement. Gender roles were initially caused by the fact that work used to be dangerous. It used to be hazardous. It used to be messy. And so we had gender roles. We had women stayed at home, men went out and worked in the coal mine. They worked at slaughtering pigs, whatever the hell it was. Then when technology came in, convenience offered the fact that, well, factory work then became working in a factory or wearing a suit and tie. And so what happened was work changed. And so we changed our thinking about gender roles in regards to work. It wasn't because there was a patriarchy trying to subjugate women. It's not like working in a copper mine gives you power. That's not why they went out and worked in the copper mine. We don't go out and slaughter pigs because that's where the power is. It's absurd.
All right. So originally, when we were a hunter-gatherer society, there was a generally egalitarian mixture of work. Women would do much of the gathering, whereas men would do much of the hunting. That at that time, both sides had about equivalent power. Even the female might have had a little more power. Then we switched to an agrarian society. People settled down in homes. And at that point, you are correct that more men were doing more of the dangerous work, and thus they would have more of the physical aspects, more of the power. As that continued, though, there started to become a belief that only men could do the work and that women were of lesser intelligence. You see this if you read most spiritual texts. You can look at the Bible, you can look at the Quran, you can look at some of the Eastern books. Any of these things started to develop the belief that women were not capable of reaching the same intellectual pursuits as men were. So they started to incorporate rules based on that way of thinking. Look at Muslim societies where women are not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to leave the house. They're supposed to wear certain outfits because the expectation is that's what they are. So there was absolutely a set of rules that were instated as a result of men having that amount of power. Now, I agree with you that over the last 150 years, especially in the West, much of that power system has been dismantled, but there are still elements of it which exist, which is why I brought up the example of like women using men's names or expectations of what goes into an executive position. Now, you brought up a lot of examples of issues that men face, and I absolutely agree with you that there are issues that men face. But what I am suggesting is not that dismantling the patriarchy is going to solve that. I'm suggesting that if we are to view each gender equally, that is what will solve these issues. Part of the problem that is holding men back is this idea that they are supposed to be a certain thing. One of the reasons men have not advanced in schooling is because men do not have a safe place to get rid of their emotions. They are expected by much of culture to hold back all emotions inside of them. That's dangerous to anyone, male or female. They don't have a safe outlet, and so much of that emotion winds up manifesting itself in violence. That's an issue that men face that feminists are trying to help with. If both sides were able to have the same equality with cultural expectations of who they should be, then this would benefit both women who currently have less generally in society and face more crime, but it would help men just as much because you would have issues of men in school. They'd be able to better deal with their emotions. These boys would do better. You would have issues of less male crime. They'd be able to do better.
Okay. Now, what you're saying are part of the causes, but because you're basing it all on patriarchy theory, everything's blamed on men. You just went down a list. You blamed every single problem men face on men.
I said much of it is based on cultural expectations, which originally were probably set by men, but they're still enforced a lot of the time by women. You'll still hear women saying those things like, don't be a little whiny bitch." You know, I heard that from girls when I was growing up, and like that's the sort of thing that both men and women feed into cultural expectations. And feminism is saying break down those cultural expectations, and many feminists take that to the point of patriarchy theory,
but to do it in a totally ignorant way. Based upon the fact that men are a power elite and we have to take their power away, and that's the problem. Right, their power.
When did I say that?
It's ridiculous.
Benjamin, when did I say that?
I don't care if you say it. You're talking about feminism.
Well,
it doesn't matter if you say it. If maybe you're a moderate feminist, it doesn't matter because feminism is rooted in the concept of patriarchy theory, so they can't solve any problems. I don't know of any problem they've solved ever. What problem has ever been solved by the concept of patriarchy theory? Patriarchy theory isn't even good for girls. I mean, you look at things like rape is about power. That doesn't. What we've been thinking that now for 30 years. Have they made a dent in rape statistics?
Okay, well, actually, rape has gone down quite a bit. Part of the reason that rape has gone back
not compared to other crimes.
You're right. It should have gone down more. But one of the reasons that rape has actually gone up a little bit recently is because we changed the definition of rape. We changed the definition, and now we recognize more issues of rape, like, for instance, male rape. And also, more people are actually coming forward to admit the rape that has happened to them, which is something that did not occur in the past.
Well, it's also child molestation and things like that. That hasn't really gone down that much either.
Right, I agree. And
because the way we're viewing that whole picture is wrong. And the issue is that feminists are the voice on all these. But whenever we talk about any kind of gender issues, you have a feminist on TV most of the time. And they don't understand how men think. They have no concern for how men think. They think they already understand how men think, and they don't. And you can't. They just their ideas are basically flawed.
Okay, so for a lot of feminists, I would agree that that's probably the case. But there are also a lot of Catholics who believe things that are not what Catholics believe. There are pro-life people who have weird opinions about what pro-life people are supposed to believe. Any movement's going to have differences of opinion within it. But I mean, you and I are having a debate here. I'm trying to answer your points. I would appreciate it if you would listen to what I'm saying too, because I'm suggesting something I don't think is that out there. I'm just saying that the issues that men face can be addressed under a feminist viewpoint. And a feminist viewpoint doesn't have to be stemming from the same thing that you're talking about. For instance, I agree that there was a intentionally patriarchal society. Actually, I say that there was an intentionally patriarchal society for much of recorded history. I don't think that the current society is intentionally patriarchal, but I do think that it still bears many of the effects of that previous intentionally patriarchal society. Would you agree that that is at least partially the case?
I don't agree. I think that you're basing that idea on the fact that the East is basically a time machine to look into the past of the West. That whatever is happening in the East and like Middle Eastern countries and China, etc., is the way we used to operate. It's basically a nationalistic superiority kind of idea that whatever they're doing there is what we used to do.
Right, but if you look at even like recordings of like medieval history, you see the kings and the knights, and you see the amount of power that was.
But there were queens. There were queens.
There were queens, yes, but queens did not have the amount of power. Much of their power was nominal, and there were a few queens who would wind up with actual power. But if you actually like look at like a percentage of who had power, it was almost always males.
But it wasn't the degree of what's happening in the Middle East.
Well, also look at the Scarlet Letter or things like that. Any woman who had sex outside of marriage would be someone who would be shamed and or killed. If you look at like medieval torture methods, many of them were specifically designed to punish women for infidelity. There have been expectations of what women are expected to be throughout history. Even when we wound up with democracy, women were foregone the right to vote, which was based on what people thought women were capable of.
Okay, I'm hearing a whole lot of arguments for a women's rights movement, which I'm all for. I'm not hearing a whole lot about why you think feminism can deal with the concept of patriarchy theory can deal with a men's rights movement. I think your only objection here to a men's rights movement is it being called that. Because basically, if you call it that, then that assumes patriarchy theory is false.
Well, I mean, I had two things that I was saying. The first thing I was saying was that the best way to solve any issues that men face is by a focus on egalitarianism, which is the same as a focus on feminism. And I get that you don't like that definition of feminism, but that's what feminists define feminism to mean.
But it doesn't matter what they define it to mean. No one would call themselves that if they. It's like asking Christians to define Christian.
I do. The definition of feminism. Seriously, if you look it up right now, the definition of feminism.
And you believe in patriarchy theory. That's why you call it. That's why you're fine. A feminist, practically speaking, is a person who thinks the best term for egalitarianism is feminism, and a person would only think that if they believed in patriarchy theory. So, practically speaking, a feminist is a person who believes in patriarchy theory.
Well, patriarchy theory isn't even theory; it's just history.
It's bullshit. It's complete and utter bullshit.
The concept that there is a overarching conspiracy among men right now to control women is very likely bullshit. I agree with you on that. But the idea that that hasn't existed before is wrong. It
never existed
before.
Gender roles came about due to necessity. Due to the fact that
women were less intelligent. That's what you're saying.
What's that?
You're saying that necessity was what created the mindset that women were not as intelligent, not as able to read or write, not able to be educated. That was due to necessity.
Well, because those were jobs. Those usually involved jobs working outside the home. And work outside the home was messy and dangerous. Not reading. Most people couldn't read most of human history anyway.
If you look at like the percentages throughout medieval ages, women were not allowed to be educated.
But most people couldn't, because those are jobs. And the concept of work, most people work was dangerous. And even in that sense, though, men are still a victim of the fact that they're not seen as nurturing because women were seen as the people who worked in the home. And that carries on to today because men are not allowed to, we try to fight against men raising children, etc. So we don't want men to do work in the home too. So it goes both ways.
But let me ask you that then. Okay, well, who is fighting against men being able to be single parents? Is that what feminists are doing? Or
I don't know about feminists. I'm not blaming feminists for all our problems. I just know that their solutions are wrong.
Okay, now, well, actually, if you read a lot of like feminist literature, they support the concept of single dads. You like that concept.
Who gives? I don't care. I mean, gynocentrism pre-existed feminism. We're blabbing about feminism. The only issue about feminism that is relevant to this debate is you thinking that feminism can solve these problems. That's not the issue. The issue. I'm not blaming feminism for these problems. No, can't solve the problems because it's based on a flawed premise. It's based on the premise that all sexism is caused by a power elite trying to subjugate a weaker group.
Okay, no, but that again, that's not what I'm saying.
And I don't know how. I know that's not what you're saying, but you're saying feminism is the answer, and that's what feminism is.
Yeah, and if you look at many of the things that feminists advocate for, like for instance, fighting against expectations of what a man has to be, which forces him into a corner, forces him to not be able to address his emotions, and doesn't allow him to be, like you said, a single dad. That's what feminism is fighting against. Because feminism is the idea that both sides be treated equally. Feminism is rooted in the fact that currently there is more of an imbalance toward women, which is why it's called feminism. But feminists routinely
but there isn't, though. That's
address
nonsense.
the issues that, okay, but that's not nonsense.
Yes,
because, well, all right, well, that
okay, then why?
like,
okay, explain to me, if feminism is about equality, why did feminists stop the ERA?
Stop the what?
Why did feminists stop the ERA?
I'm not sure what the ERA is.
The Equal Rights Amendment that was passed in the 70s was passed by the federal Congress, one of the few amendments to the Constitution that was defeated statewide that passed federally. And it guaranteed equal rights for men and women. When it got to the state level, feminists started to oppose it because they realized that it would end, say, the alimony situation, child custody situations. It would make women have to sign up for selective services, etc., etc. Then there was a grassroots movement in California to stop it. And now we have the ERA being proposed again. It's been amended. Now the ERA says equal rights for women. The equal rights for the genders is off the table now.
Well, it sounds like that was likely passed because while in idealistic sense, it would be great if we had that sort of system. Right now, since a high percentage of crime, violence, and abuse is committed by males against females, you do need to have some sort of system that attempts to rebalance that.
So this is the problem with patriarchy theory. You destroy the stronger group to create equality. So you create equality by creating inequality.
No,
this is why I'm not a feminist.
No,
this is why it doesn't work.
Against the majority of violence. So this would be like saying, "Oh, we need to have laws against 14-year-old girls because a couple of Slendermen they killed their friend because of Slenderman. So we need to have laws against that." Well, no, because statistically, that's not as much as likely. You focus on what is most likely, and you attempt to pragmatically solve that. Now, I don't know the specifics with the Equal Rights Amendment. I don't know what their specific rules are. It seems like the sort of thing that I would usually support, but I can understand why at that period of time there may have been some who would have been against it. All that I am arguing for is the fact that the men's rights movement, the fact that there are issues that men face can be best solved by focusing on trying to break down barriers of what men are expected to be, which is what feminism advocates for. And the other argument that I had, the reason why men's rights movement is unnecessary is because we should not be focusing our time and effort into issues that men face when the issues are bigger for what women face. Same thing. It's just about asset allocation. The assets should go towards the group who has a bigger issue.
Okay, I'd like to have this discussion again to go on about just that subject alone, because everything you've said about that is just so ridiculous that women face bigger problems than men in this country. It is absurd. It's like saying that the freaking sky is green. That's how absurd that is. Okay, we're down to a minute, but I'd just like to say thank you for taking the time, Daniel, in this discussion. And I don't think we addressed nearly enough as I'd like to. But again, well, I'm tired, so that's probably explains my ranting and yelling. But have a good night, sir, and I'm glad you took the time to talk with me. Good evening, folks. Just commenting a little bit at the end of the video. I felt the debate was a little confusing and left some things unresolved, and I don't like things to end that way, especially if I'm going to post it on my channel, and I think that there's enough worth preserving in the debate to post it on my channel. And so I want my videos to be educational, and so I wanted to comment a little bit more about the issue and what was said in this debate. And I'm aware that by doing so, I am saying things that Daniel can't respond to, and that is technically unfair, but I'm aware that it's unfair. So what I'm taking away from this is two things. He wants a men's rights movement,
which is not what his premise says. His premise says a men's rights movement's unnecessary, but he wants one, but he wants it led by feminists. And he doesn't want it to be called the men's rights movement. So really the objection here is to it being called that. And the position is really highlights why that can't happen or why that won't work. Is because the very fact that he is objecting to it being called that, basically because it goes against patriarchy theory for a movement to be called a men's rights movement. And for that very reason, because feminism promotes patriarchy theory, we can't get any real progress on these numerous men's issues. And when I said that at the end, that him claiming women's issues are worse than men's issues in America is like claiming the sky is green. Basically what I mean is that in every single avenue in American life, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about healthcare spending, 32% more is spent on female healthcare than male healthcare, even though men have far worse healthcare problems. The National Cancer Institute spent 4 times more on breast cancer research than prostate cancer research. I don't know how feminism allows for that, or how feminism can deal with that. 13 of the 15 leading causes of death are for men's issues. Just bring up a few extra things that I didn't bring up in the debate, just to enumerate how the state of men in America today. Male children are over twice as likely to be murdered as female children. Men comprise 77% of the homeless. So when it comes to, we're more victims of crime, yes, rape. That's the only thing he could bring up as far as women's issues was rape. Harassment, rape, things like that. Or being stalked or whatever. But that's just a subset or a category within overall crime, and overall men are more victims of crime. But we don't care. We don't spend as much attention on it. So, we're talking about, the custody issue, the crime issue, the health issue. Basically, in every single avenue in American life, men have it worse. What he's really doing by bringing up men and being in positions of power is he's saying that necessarily implies that we have a better status in life, that the regular common man, me, has a better status in life than the regular woman, simply because there are more men in power, which is very similar to what Nazis would argue, because there's Jews in the banks and there's Jews running the government, and that means that the common man, the normal Jew, has power over everybody else. You could really take a lot of the things that are said by feminists about these sorts of subjects and transplant them to racial issues, and you would get the opposite answer, or people would normally give the opposite answer. For instance, we were talking about these crime rates, men being more likely to engage in crime. Typically when we say that, the reason black people are more likely per capita to engage in crime is because they have cultural issues which are caused by racism. It's a symptom of the racism. Why don't we say the same thing about men causing more violent crimes? Well, that is a symptom of the sexism, or the idea that men are scum, and when you're told you're toxic and everything about you is wrong, obviously you're going to be more likely to engage in these kinds of crimes. But we don't need a men's movement. Or we don't need to call it that. So it goes to the central issue of why feminism can't solve this. He's saying, in his own words, as a feminist, that he's not willing to solve these problems. He's not willing to, because he thinks that women have it so much worse. And so that's why we have to have a men's rights movement. Anyway, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of this, whatever this is, and thanks for watching.